there any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric? From feedback to learner autonomy, we'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
Hi Matthew.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Matt.
And welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters, presented by three self-certified TEFLologists.
TEFL Pioneers.
Okay, for this week's TEFL Pioneer, I'll be talking about Peter Strevens.
Okay.
And like Rob's TEFL Pioneer last year, I was about to say, not even last week, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
He was someone that's very hard to find access to his work.
Right.
His work's out there, but it's very hard to get access to his work.
Mm-hmm.
And they're kind of tucked away in very old journals. And yeah, he's somebody who like L.A. Hill, should be more well known, I think. And yeah, so I'm going to talk about his work today.
Okay.
And I actually found this person through Rob's book that he was quoting from last time. So there's a bit of a connection there, but no other connection. So he was born in 1922, and he passed away actually in Tokyo
Okay.
in 1989.
Okay.
In this very room.
Very close to here. It was actually at a language teachers conference. He died, but I was wondering what conference.
On stage, like Tommy Cooper.
I'm not sure, but apparently he suffered a heart attack at the conference,
Yeah.
or when he was here for the conference.
That's how I want to go.
Yeah. He also, I would talk a bit about his background first and about some of his contributions. So before he moved into the language world, or the world of language teaching and learning, he was in the ambulance unit in the Second World War.
All right.
Not just the ambulance unit, one of many ambulance units
Okay.
that they had in the Second World War.
Yep.
He studied language and phonetics at the Gold Coast University College, which I thought was in Australia.
Yeah, sounds like it
It's in
should be.
Ghana.
Oh, okay. The other Gold Coast.
Yeah. And yeah, he studied there, and he was one of the founding members of the School of Applied Linguistics at Edinburgh University after that.
Right.
And he worked and collaborated with the likes of Michael Halliday
Yeah.
and A.K. Halliday.
Mac Halliday.
During his time there. After that, he went on to open up a new applied linguistics centre at the University of Leeds, and he also worked at the University of Essex before becoming a visiting professor in the States. Also, quite interestingly about Peter Strevens is he also crossed over from the university world into the language school sector, which is quite interesting, and he was one of the directors of the Bell Educational Trust,
Right.
which is still going today.
Yep.
I think they're accredited by the British Council, and they're still a course provider. I think
Sure
they
they
have
are,
language
yes.
schools, and yeah. So that's one interesting point about him. And he also wrote articles under the name of the Bell Educational Trust as well.
Yeah. Sorry.
I mean, that wasn't just his name. You know. He still used his name, Peter Strevens. He was also a member of the editorial board for the Oxford Applied Linguistics Journal from 1980 to 1986, and he was also the chairman of IA Tefl at one point too.
Okay.
And Alan Davies mentions that Strevens had a love for the sea.
Okay.
Which brings me nicely to his first pioneering contribution. That was why I mentioned that.
C-S-E-A or C, the letter C?
Sea, like the sea. The sea. Like the, yeah. So the reason I mentioned the sea was because this is related to one of his first pioneering contributions. Okay. And this was to his work on sea speak. Have you heard of this before?
No. Is it presumably a variety of English used by people on boats?
Yeah, basically, yeah. It's the international language for maritime communication. And he was one of the principal instigators of this in 1984. And he wrote a book called The Sea Speak Reference Manual. So C-speak is a controlled natural language, a CNL. I've never heard that term before.
No.
Okay.
And it was designed to facilitate communication between ships whose first language differed. Now, when I wrote ships there, I actually meant people on the ships. Not like, do you remember like that Thomas the Tank Engine
Yeah,
spin-off?
there's a tugboat. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's not that.
Okay.
Obviously. Between the seafarers, I guess.
Yeah.
whose
I think when you say between ships, we understand
Yeah.
it's the people on the ships.
whose first language differed. So it was principally built on English.
Ah, right,
or
okay.
around English.
So it's not. Is it? But is it also used between people whose first language is English?
Well, they have, I guess, different Englishes.
Mm.
Okay, so it was built on English, and it had a very small range of vocabulary, and it makes use of foreign words where there are no suitable English words.
Right.
So, for example, the term "say again" replaces "repeat what you said" and "what did you say" and so forth.
Yeah.
So it's that very simplified kind of language.
You hear that in films sometimes, don't you? Say again, say again.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, like Mayday, that kind of language. You know,
Where does Mayday come? Oh, it must come from French, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was all standardised in, I believe, this book. Perhaps.
How
But
about
I-
SOS?
Good ABBA song. It's a good ABBA song.
Alright.
Yeah. Yeah. So C-speak is an example of. It could be an example of ESP, I believe, and it could be argued that Strevens was one of the first developers of an ESP approach.
Right.
And even as far back as the 1970s, he argued that English teaching shouldn't be a general educational or cultural subject, but he recognised a growing demand at the time for English to be used between science, technology, and technical services. And this was called TTSE. He coined it at the time.
Right.
Okay.
So this came at a time before ESP, and I think the whole ESP materials developed.
Yeah.
I know there's, you know, the Asian EFL journal. That's quite well known. There's a series of other journals that are part of the same publishing company, and one of them is called the Maritime ESP Journal or something like that, which I always thought was really weird. But now that kind of makes sense that there actually is a sort of a
Yeah. So I think he recognised the need for, you know, these varieties of language to be taught. But however, though, and what I'll go on to next is he also believed that the term standard English was something that was very valuable.
Okay.
And believed we should keep.
What did he mean by standard English then?
He believes that so in one of his articles he sets out what it's not, and he also argues for 3 reasons why we need to have this term standard English.
Okay.
So he said it provides a way of accounting for a range of observable distinctions and attitudes. It offers a label for the grammatical and lexical components, at least, of the teaching core undertaken by the profession of teaching English, whether as the mother tongue or as a foreign or second language. And it also constitutes the unifying elements within enormous diversity of the English language. So it seems that he was accepting on one hand that it's good to have a standard English, but that it shouldn't be taught in a general manner. I think that's what he's kind of getting at.
like it shouldn't be taught as the only thing.
Yeah.
You mean? Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think he believes that we should have a standard principle that we follow. However, we should also realise that there are these varieties and different needs for English.
Yeah.
Okay. So the standard is the kind of that's kind of like runs down the middle. It's something that you can reference other varieties of English like against.
Yeah.
Or it's something you can always come back to.
I think so. Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah. Basically, I think that's perhaps what he was coming at.
And what is the standard? What's it derived from?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. That was my reading of these two different, because like I said to Rob earlier before you arrived, Matt, it's very hard to pin down what Peter Strevens was all about. You know, like some people have a very clear thing that they write about, but I think others around the time in the 60s and the 50s, they kind of just wrote about kind of everything.
Yeah. Like L.A. Hill, who we talked about 2 weeks ago, he had the same kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Just picking and choosing different topics.
Yeah.
Flitting about.
Which is understandable. I mean, you would imagine that's the majority of people who work in our field. You know, it's not everybody's the luxury of finding that one thing to focus on.
I think just in every field now, people kind of hyper-specialise, whereas in those days it was more, you're a generalist and you can write about lots of different things, you can take inspiration from different areas. There's fewer polymaths and Renaissance men these days.
Mm-hmm. He also wrote a little bit about professional development as well, and identities of teachers at the time. And I found one article that was really up to date, and he talked about the overlapping roles in our profession. And he suggested that within our work it's possible to identify 3 general categories of pedagogical role.
Right.
Instructor, teacher, and educator.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And he differentiates between them. He says the instructor limits himself deliberately or through immaturity to presentation, to the techniques of instruction, to being an informant and not much more.
Right.
Mm-hmm. The teacher is a good instructor, however, but more than an instructor, he is engaged in the deliberate management of learning and therefore with aims, goals and curricula and materials, with the maintenance and improvement of professional standards for teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And the educator is a good teacher, but more than the teacher, he is also concerned with the relation in terms of the learner between language, tuition, and all the other elements in the student's curriculum, with the general social needs which his subject encounters, and with how to meet other needs not yet adequately catered to by language teachers.
Which one are you?
That's a good question. I believe I'm a teacher.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
What about you?
The teacher. What does the teacher do beyond the instructor? Engage in maintenance, improvements, professional standards for teachers. Yeah, I guess I'm a teacher.
Yeah, I'm an instructor.
Well, I was trying to think of what links like his writing here to what we were talking about previously. Because he seems to want to differentiate between different things, but he also wants to have a set of common principles.
In terms of just the profession as a whole?
Yeah. Because he kind of talks about the need for having a standard English, but also recognises ESP uses.
Yeah.
And he also recognises that there are lots of different pedagogical roles, but they're all linked in some way. That's kind of what I was taking from his work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that sounds pretty standard for thought today, I guess.
Yeah,
I mean, I'd be a bit more questioning about the need for particular standards, and I'd particularly be questioning, as I said, what those standards are derived from. Yeah. But I think, it seems like that's pretty much, if you asked your average teacher what they felt about those topics, they'd probably feel a similar way to how he's described it then.
Yeah, and finally as well, and this kind of, there's links with everything, I guess, he felt that the term applied linguistics is obscure and misleading. And he believes that it involves more than just the application of theory. He felt that it involves a wide range of intellectual and practical activities, and he proposed 5 definitions of applied linguistics, or as we think of it. So he believes it's dynamic, it redefines itself afresh for each task. It shouldn't be restricted to an interest in learning and teaching of languages, but it should have multiple bases in theory and principle.
Yeah, I mean, I think this definition business is like Widdowson distinguishes between applied linguistics and linguistics applied, which seems to be what he's doing as well.
Yeah.
But then you get people like Keister Bott, who talks about his book, A History of Applied Linguistics, and he defines applied linguistics as, I think, something like the development and use of multiple languages. Yeah. So he defines it basically as just SLA.
Yeah. Who are we talking about? Peter Strevens says that applied linguistics is kind of financially backed by language teaching and learning.
Right.
So it seems like, they basically have a stake in it, basically. So it's in their best interest to develop applied linguistics in that direction.
Right.
And he doesn't believe that should be the case. It should be, have a lot of many definitions, like he says.
Yeah, well, it is true whenever you say to people, I study applied linguistics, they say, well, that's just language teaching. I study all this other stuff as well. And people who do applied linguistics degrees end up studying completely different topics to each other for a lot, in a lot of cases. So, I think it's kind of an unhelpful term, applied linguistics in a way. Which is why you get people who specialise in TESOL or SLA or something else. Yeah.
So it seems like, with Peter Strevens' work, he kind of strived to kind of... he wanted to talk about the differences, I think. Well, he wanted to establish a common ground, but I don't think he shied away from trying to show everyone the differences, like in like our professional lives, and also in how English is used in different contexts, basically.
Yeah.
TEFL News.
Okay, for this episode's TEFL News, I'd like to look at three separate news stories, but all of them are about new ventures in terms of helping students learn English.
Okay.
Okay, so the first one comes from Japan. It's the city of Takasaki in Gunma, Ken. And this is a kind of, they call it an immersion program. But basically the idea is students learning English through kind of mountain activities.
Okay. Mountain activities.
Mountain activities, hiking, rice planting, that kind of thing.
Sounds good. I'd like to do that.
Yeah. All right. Well, unfortunately, you can't because you already speak English.
Okay.
Unless you want to develop your English as a lingua franca, perhaps.
I do.
So it's a municipal scheme. So the city itself is building a dormitory in the countryside, and the idea is the students from different schools will all come together and use English, exclusively English, while doing all these activities. How do you feel about this?
I think the concern would be making sure they actually did that, because I think most of them wouldn't do that. They just speak Japanese.
Right.
Yeah. So do they mention having any ways of actually enforcing that?
They don't. I think what I imagine they don't mention it, but what I imagine they would do is select students who probably really like English anyway.
Okay.
And they have what they call English-speaking staff to kind of assist with everything.
Police.
Police them, yeah.
God.
But the idea is it's basically like a little vacation in the mountains, doing activities, but all through English.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's the point, isn't it? Through English.
Yeah.
I think that's the argument for like these English-only policies. I think you can not always, but I think you can always address them by saying, "But we're just doing it through English." Is that enough of an argument?
What do you mean?
Because it's not really. I guess putting people in the countryside that's kind of authentic, I guess. But then, like in terms of an English-only policy, I think it's enough of an argument to say, well, we're just doing things through English.
Yeah.
Right. By means of English.
Yeah. Yeah.
So part of the idea here is also, I think, to take students out of the classroom. And do you think that's an important aspect? I mean, obviously, these are all, I don't know all, but presumably mostly, if not all, Japanese students. And so they don't need to speak English to each other to communicate.
Right.
But maybe the idea here is they're just in a different environment. Do you think a change of environment is important for language learning?
I think it can be. I think you have different things to talk about. The idea that the classroom is kind of, you mentioned authenticity, and there's an argument, I guess, that the classroom isn't an authentic space. So taking them into a more of an authentic social setting. I think it could spur more discussion. It could create more naturalistic discussion, perhaps.
Yep. Yeah.
Motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I imagine certain ESP. I imagine
Do they go to see it all during the
but I imagine also that just being in a different environment and doing certain activities is going to push students to different vocabulary and potentially different forms of the language that they might have to use.
Yeah.
And hopefully, and also I think just like the everyday things that you do in terms of everyday interactions. I don't know what kind of input they'll get. Maybe that's one issue here.
Right.
But I like as a language learner, I'm with different languages I've tried to learn, I've been aware that I could read books in the language and I can conjugate verbs and all that kind of stuff. But some like very basic interactions, like saying hi or saying good morning, I suddenly don't know what to say.
Yeah.
So if they have an opportunity to do those kinds of interactions repeatedly, then that could be helpful. Okay.
Yes.
The next one I'd like to talk about is it's a ESL program. This is in the States, in Philadelphia. This is the idea of learning English through cooking. So I guess they don't call it a CLIL course, but I guess it is, because the idea is that the students learn both how to cook and learn English while doing it.
Right.
A big idea of this is that it's ESL, so it's a lot of people who have come to America, to Philadelphia in this case, from different countries, and maybe they're not that aware of the foods of that area. So it is partly to kind of raise their awareness of local foods. But there's also a strong language learning focus to it.
Yeah, we do that here actually a little bit with in my university.
Yeah.
So occasionally there are events held by the International Studies Centre where the students get together and do cooking events where they cook each other's food from different countries and study English through that. Yeah.
Okay.
So.
How did the students respond to that?
They like the cooking.
Okay.
I think the English. Well, to be honest, I think it's a lot of the international students are here to study Japanese. And I think they find the English aspect of it a bit confusing.
Right.
But yeah, I think they enjoy it at least.
What's interesting here is that they have two teachers. So they have an ESL teacher and a cooking teacher teaching at the same time, kind of in cooperation.
Right.
So an example, the article I read about this gave was the teacher defining the word sizzle. And what's not clear to me is if the students ask, like, how do you describe that sound that your frying pan is making? Or if the teacher said, okay, we're going to learn a new word, sizzle, here's an example.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you remember that Scott Thornbury did a presentation about actually trying to use the recipes from textbooks to cook things, and it was like pour in the wine and stuff like that.
I taught on a summer program once in England, and we for Japanese learners coming over to the UK, and we had 3 lessons. One lesson was a vocabulary, mostly vocabulary input lesson, if I can remember. The next lesson was reading the menu and applying. It might have all been the same lesson actually.
Okay.
And so reading the menu, and then the last part of the lesson after the break was actually using that menu. And yeah, they all made Welsh cakes.
Okay.
And the menu was for a beef stroganoff. No, it wasn't. It was for a Welsh cake recipe.
Okay.
Not menu, sorry, recipe.
Yeah. So they with this course they supplement. So there is a reading element. They read cookbooks and recipes. They're asked to go to the supermarket and find certain items by reading, obviously.
Right.
Reading labels.
Yep.
The idea that part of the idea here is that the kitchen is a kind of safe zone for these people. They're interested in food anyway, or interested in cooking, and so it kind of puts them at ease, similar to maybe the mountain courses.
Do you think this would be a good approach on a wider scale for, for example, immigrants coming to an English-speaking country, having these kind of scenarios, these different situations, in like you say, a safe space?
Yeah.
Or is there any safe space these days? That's a whole other topic.
Right. Well, I mean, in this case, a lot of the learners are immigrants to the country.
Yeah.
So that is kind of the idea. But it would be interesting to find other areas of life that they could do similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Life integrated teaching.
Nice.
That kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah. What other areas do you think?
Things like John Coleman talked about this when you interviewed him, about he when he spoke to the learners, we don't use the textbooks because nothing in the textbook is what we really need. They need to go to the doctors, they need to speak to a doctor. I mean that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then again, how often do you so cooking is something you do every day.
Yeah.
I wonder what other everyday things you really.
Yeah.
Well, everyone does different things every day, don't they?
That's true.
Some
of us make podcasts.
Yes. So imagine that, English for making podcasts for teaching English.
Yeah, you should write a book.
Yeah.
So what's interesting here though is when they describe the course, they never describe it as a CLIL course, and it's very possible that people put it together don't consider it CLIL or even know what CLIL is, but it seems like a very natural thing to do. And the other kind of maybe principle that we as people interested in the field would identify is they talk a lot about kind of point of need input.
Right. Okay.
So that the students, they're taught a word as it appears as an ingredient or as an action, and that does seem like a very effective immediate method of making those words.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, as they emerge.
Yeah.
Then you repeat them naturally a lot.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? Means that okay?
Yeah. So
and
pass
then
me
just
the
keep
avocado.
using it. Yeah.
Yeah.
For
Pass
example.
me the avocado.
For
That's
example.
the chapter 7. Pass me the avocado. I'm going to put it on some toast.
Words are repeated.
whole week.
Words are repeated a lot in recipes, aren't they? Like avocado. Okay, pass me the avocado. Chop the avocado. Okay, now put the avocado into the frying pan.
Yeah.
Which pan? That pan.
The avocado pan.
Okay, which a lot of repetition.
Yeah, especially with the word avocado.
Yeah.
Apparently. Okay. All right. So the last kind of new venture I want to talk about comes from New Zealand, and this is a couple of filmmakers who decided to make a drama, like a TV show, but specifically for adult English language students.
Okay. Didn't the British Council do that, but as like a radio show? As like what's it?
Well,
like a soap opera.
Like The Archers.
Yeah, there was a radio soap opera on the
Okay.
British Council's website
All right.
about some insufferable people living in a house.
Yeah. I mean, there have been quite a few over the years. I guess a few filmed ones. A lot of just audio,
Yeah.
maybe to supplement course books, that kind of thing. Like you follow a story throughout the chapters. And maybe online a few audio-video ones.
So this is for learners? Or
This is for
just-
learners.
Okay, so not just for speakers of English, is it? This is for learners.
The point of it is specifically to help students learn English.
Right, okay.
But I guess what's different here is their approach has been to make it a proper show, which is
Right.
So their entry. I think at least one of the filmmakers has a background in language teaching, but they very much wanted to make sure that it works as a drama in its own.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's it called?
It's called Fortune,
Okay.
and it takes place in a bar.
Right.
It's different characters in the bar interacting with each other.
Okay.
Yeah. And what happens is there's different. I think it's available in at different levels, so you can have it graded to different levels of language. So do you think this would be a good, effective method of language learning?
I think so. It depends how long the episodes are, and this isn't something that you could make available at all levels, right? It would assume a certain understanding of the language.
Yeah.
So, I can see some difficulties with it. I think it's a great idea. But I could I imagine myself doing this as a language learner. I think if it was really long, I'd find it difficult to concentrate for the entire time. So if it was like a 45-minute drama, then that'd be a bit tough to follow. If it was like 10-15 minutes, then great. But then also, I'd imagine that there might be some level difficulties.
Yeah.
In what sense is this for learners? Like, is it written? Is it
Yes.
graded?
So it is graded, and it is aimed at higher levels. So there's an A2 level, and a B2 level.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So it is done at 2 different levels. Is it the same story both times?
Yeah.
Or they get the people to come back and do a second take.
I guess so. Yeah.
Okay.
And is there any sort of review or? I wonder how in the writing how much they repeat things.
Yeah.
Do they have subtitles? Is there?
Right. I don't think there are subtitles, as far as I know. There are teaching and learning materials available to go along with it.
Right.
But for me, that almost kind of starts to take away from it.
Yeah.
And it feels more like
it becomes.
just more material.
Where can this be watched?
It hasn't launched yet,
Okay.
but it will launch soon on the internet.
Are we talking Netflix or?
Maybe not Netflix,
Okay.
but it's
Amazon Prime.
called. Maybe not even Amazon Prime.
Kazoo.
I don't know that one. Yes. MySpace. But it's called Fortune. There's 6 episodes that will be released. I'm sure you can find it Googling it that way. And if all goes well, they're hoping for a 2nd season.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is this episode's TEFL News.
TEFL Cultures.
Today's TEFL culture is Post-human Applied Linguistics.
Okay.
So this is a new way of thinking about applied linguistics put forward by Alistair Pennycook, who we've discussed before. So I came across this. There's 2 articles written about this. One in Applied Linguistics called Post-humanist Applied Linguistics by Pennycook, and a second one published this year, Swimming with Sharks: Ecological Feminism and Post-Human Language Politics, written with him and Rosalind Appleby, published in Critical Inquiry and Language Studies. So I saw both of these and I thought, sounds a bit weird. But I like Alistair Pennycook's work. I've got a lot of time for him, so I read both of the articles. And they're a bit weird, but I think it's worth discussing.
Yeah.
So I should mention that Pennycook is writing a book about this. It's due out next month, actually. So he's probably written it all. Which is called Post-human or Post-humanist Applied Linguistics. So I'm sure there'll be a lot more detail in there. But today I'm going to be talking mostly about the Applied Linguistics article.
Okay.
Yeah. So first of all, what is post-humanism? Any ideas?
No.
Okay.
So, but the original title is post-human.
Post-human or post-humanistic.
Okay.
So there's two different ways of saying it.
What's humanistic? What's humanism?
Well, humanism is basically putting humans. So there's a movement of humanism essentially. It's putting humans as the center of our kind of moral concern.
Okay.
I guess.
Okay.
So
as opposed to God or.
Right, yeah, that kind of thing. Well, that's maybe one way of thinking about humanism. I think there's a broader philosophical debate about it. But post-humanism is meant to question human exceptionalism. So question humans as something separate from their environment, from other animals, even from other objects, essentially.
Okay.
So it questions the concept of interiority versus exteriority. So there is us within, there is the human mind within your head, and there is you within that, and then there is the exterior world. And it's saying that you can't cut a dividing line, or you can't put a dividing line between the interior and the exterior. They are linked in some way.
Yeah.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. So how do you think that could have any influence or any meaning for applied linguistics? And bearing in mind applied linguistics, not just language teaching and learning.
Right.
Well, I guess it would affect the way that we view language development, maybe. Especially if we think about like things like different systems, complex systems, and that kind of thing. It would affect that because maybe if you were going to take a humanist approach, you'd think about the cognitive side of things, right? But a post-humanist wouldn't do that. Maybe it would look at other things in the environment. Maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the idea of the humanistic language teaching. I don't know if it's referring to that necessarily.
Not explicitly, I don't think.
Right.
But I think you're bang on with that. So before Pennycook in his article gets to the idea of post-humanist applied linguistics, he talks about repertoires, right? So one example that I liked was he's talking about a restaurant in Tokyo, and he says,
Which one?
It's called Petit Paris, actually.
Okay.
Small little
I
Paris.
should find it.
That's my French there. So he says, the material artifacts and activities in a small bistro in Tokyo, bringing food and plates, squeezing through the small and crowded restaurant, menus, food orders, music, wine bottles, all play a role in the spatial repertoire. Okay? So within a short period, Nabil, that's the name of the person he was studying, moves around the small restaurant floor, negotiating with the chef about the dish, passing between tables, dealing with customers, and lots of other examples. And he says, Nabil is engaged in a range of tasks which do not map in any discrete functional fashion onto the linguistic resources he uses. Okay? So, basically, it's the idea of the ecology, the environment that you're in, being almost like a participant in your linguistic interaction as much as with the other people, the environment being part of that.
Yeah.
Okay? So basically, the idea of post-humanist applied linguistics is that language learning and also the study of language has to look beyond the idea of humans as separate from the environment. So one kind of concrete example might be in discourse analysis. Okay, so in discourse we do tend to divide humans off from everything else. So thinking about discourse in a way that is more inclusive of the environment and of other animals and things like that. Also, the concept of linguistics, Pennycook says, to the extent that linguistics has often supported the view that language separates us from the animals, it's played a key role in the maintenance of human exceptionalism. So he talks about this discourse where language is one of the things that's used to separate us from the animals. We have language and they don't, right? And he quotes people like Tomasello and some other linguists as saying that the way that animals such as apes see the world seems to be similarly abstract. So they can assign causality to events, they can function logically, they can communicate with each other in the same kinds of ways that humans do, but without the linguistic factor. So he's kind of trying to say that there isn't this clear dividing line between humans and human language and animal communication systems. But yeah, basically post-humanism, it sees humans as part of the environment rather than separate from or above it. Okay? So it sounds very abstract, and it is. But in terms of specific points, he talks about distributed cognition. Okay? So that's suggesting that the mind and language stretch not only outside the head, but they're located across physical space in a cognitive ecosystem. Okay? So this brings us back to the idea of the repertoire, and it's similar to sociocultural theory or sociocognitive theory, right? So he says there's a lot of affinity between these two things.
Right.
So as you were saying, the idea that the humanist approach is more cognitive, language learning is all about cognitive development. Post-humanism would see language learning as being more about development of repertoires in certain linguistic ecologies. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think about that?
I mean, presumably it's an interplay between the two.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think so.
Right.
Yeah. Or it's not seeing them as being two separate things.
Right, okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the idea of in terms of sociocultural theory, I don't remember the exact article. I think it was in the book that I can't remember. But the idea of being aware of, I think maybe it was Thornbury wrote about the embodied mind.
Yes. Yeah.
And being aware of your body as not separate from your mind, but
Right.
as part of it, and what role that plays.
So then it's extending it to not just your body, but the environment in which your body's operating.
Yeah.
It all being part of the same thing, the
Yeah.
same linguistic ecosystem.
Right.
Yeah. So I think Pennycook doesn't seem, at least in this article, he doesn't seem to be making a strong statement about exactly how all of this works. It's exploratory, it's an exploratory idea. But he's suggesting that applied linguistics needs to consider how post-humanist thinking might influence the field. So it's an area for exploration. And I'm sure in his book he goes into much more detail about this. But in terms of concrete examples that he does bring up, he mentions the semiotics of language use, the relations of repertoire, so as we discussed before, repertoire, and a way of thinking about linguistic resources as participants in the interaction as much as the humans that are using the resources. So again, there's that, instead of separating off the language system or the language being used in interactions from the people using it, the language and the people are equal participants in an interaction.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a mountain in Gunma he should go and or a cooking school in Philadelphia.
Well, do you not think, I mean, that...
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole... If you go and are learning language in that particular area, then that is going to affect your engagement with the language and with the people around you, and you'll bring different resources to that interaction, so it is a different linguistic ecology.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Do you not think that when you learn a new word, for example, that word is not cut off from the environment that it's being learnt in or used around?
Right.
So I think we do that anyway. Like I can remember when I learnt certain words in Japanese. I can remember where I was, how I used it. So I think anyway, like if you boil it down to vocabulary, like it's never devoid of any ecology.
Right, I think that's true of basically any concept that you learn. I remember when I was a kid, I asked my mum how far is a mile, and she told me it's about the distance from our house to your primary school. And for me, that is still my conception of how far a mile is.
Right.
And I can't, whenever I think of a mile, I always have to think of, it's that far and then it's that far. And yeah, so even now, that's how I conceive of that.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's... Yeah, I guess that's kind of the point, maybe.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's a maybe sort of natural like way to look at things in terms of like just the acknowledgement of the part that the role that interaction plays in developing language,
right?
And group dynamics and that kind of thing, and it's just taking that a step further.
Yeah. Well, to the point where objects are the same as people. Actually, he does have a thing where he says that a concern that was raised against this might be that humans just become part of the landscape and are completely immaterial. And he does kind of say that's not exactly what I mean, but yeah.
Right. I mean, but I think it always has to be about the recognizing the parts within the whole and how the parts make the whole and how they're still individual, within themselves.
Right, but I guess the question is: are they individual, or are they part of an interconnected system? Where is the dividing line?
Yes, but I mean, well, then it's just a case of perception. I mean,
right.
It's the lens you choose to look at something through.
Right, but
at any given moment for different purposes.
Sure, but then the lens that you choose to look at something through is going to influence what you see. Right?
Of course.
And in this case, looking at things through a post-human lens might lead you to make different decisions or to think about your ways of interacting in different ways.
Yeah.
So in that sense, adopting the post-human lens, I think that's what Pennycook's arguing for. Not so much...
right.
Not so much a stringent approach, but a different framing, different lens.
Of course, yeah. But hopefully with the understanding that you're aware that is just one way of looking at things.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
for different reasons and in different contexts, you might want to look at things at a more atomistic level for different purposes.
Again, do you think this is the correct term? Because shouldn't it be post-humanism in applied linguistics? Because I think applied linguistics, to an extent, already answers this as a concept. It's already part of it as a concept somewhere.
I think in
I see what you mean.
Rather than
claiming it as a whole separate
applied linguistics. So I don't think
something that exists within.
Yeah, because I don't think it contradicts what people have talked about previously.
No, I think it's meant as an extension. But again, I don't think he's trying to create a whole separate thing. I think he's trying to introduce a new frame, a new way of framing.
Presumably the classroom applications will be the final piece of the...
Right. Yeah, well, maybe, but then...
Maybe there wouldn't be classroom applications.
Yes, a classroom application is the central point of applied linguistics. We were just discussing this.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm not saying they are, but I'm just saying it's... I think with these things, often that's the last thing that... If anything, they're the opposite. They're on the fringes.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's a very interesting idea. I'm looking forward to reading the book. And I'm hoping that soon someone will come up with transhuman applied linguistics, which will be all about us implanting cybernetics into ourselves to become a kind of Skynet of language learning.
Yeah.
So that's this episode's Tefl Culture, post-human or post-humanist applied linguistics. Thank you very much for listening to this episode.
If you'd like to get in contact with us, you can send us an email at TEFLology@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter @TEFLology. You can like us on Facebook, that name again, TEFLology. And you can listen to our older episodes at www.teflology-podcast.com. That's the home of our podcast.
It's 3 W's then.
3 W's, don't forget that. Okay, so it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Don't forget to rate and review. I've started, by the way. So,
Okay.
Okay, so for this week's... No, sorry. Okay, hang on a second.
Just start with so. No, okay.